I'm 29 years old, male, and for the last 5 years, I've had no contact with my family, not by accident, but by choice. I walked out of that house when I was 24 and never looked back. The reason? My mother thought it was my responsibility to pay for my younger brother's university tuition. She didn't ask. She didn't discuss. She just expected it, like it was a debt I owed for being born first and making it out on my own. When I told her I couldn't help, that I was still paying off my own student loans and trying to stay afloat, she didn't care. She said I was abandoning the family. She said I was selfish. She didn't ask how I was doing, or whether I had anything to give, just called me cold for turning my back on blood. The argument was fast and brutal. There was no slow build-up. 1 second we were in the kitchen, the next I had a backpack in my hand and was walking out the front door. My father watched it happen and said nothing. That silence cut more than anything she screamed. I didn't have a plan that night. I slept in my car for 2 days before a coworker offered me his couch for a few weeks. A week after I left, I got a message, just one. No apology, no concern. Just, the locks are changed. Come back when you're ready to choose family over pride. That was the last direct communication I had from them. Over the next 5 years, I put my life back together. I moved to another city, took whatever jobs I could find, tech support, warehouse night shifts, food delivery, anything to pay rent and keep moving. I finished my degree part-time and eventually started freelancing in IT. The work was unstable at first, but I got good at it. I learned how to pitch, how to build systems, how to keep clients. I made enough to live alone and stay off the radar. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone except two people. My mother's brother who never took sides, and a childhood friend who stayed in touch quietly. Neither of them ever pushed me for details. They just let me exist without questions. 2 years after I left, I heard through my uncle that my younger brother dropped out of university. Apparently, he didn't last a full year. He moved back home, and as far as anyone knew, hadn't worked since. My parents never contacted me about it. Not when he dropped out. Not when they sold the family house. Not when they downsized into a smaller place, because money got tight. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't angry either. Not anymore. I had accepted that I'd been cut out clean. But a few weeks ago, I had minor surgery. Nothing serious. Just something that kept me off my feet for a few days. I don't know what hit me during that stretch. Maybe it was the painkillers, or maybe it was the silence, but something in me cracked a little. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't want hugs, or forgiveness, or long speeches. I just wanted to see the house I grew up in again, even just for an hour. I wanted to know if the door would still open. So I made the call. I dialed the number I hadn't used in 5 years. It still worked. My mother picked up on the second ring. Her voice sounded older but distant, like she had rehearsed the response for a call she never expected would come. I didn't waste time. I told her I wasn't asking for anything. I said I didn't want to move back in, or start over. I just wanted to visit. Just one visit. I wasn't even sure what I hoped to get out of it. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said it. Please don't. There was no emotion in her voice. No anger, no sadness, just finality. Like someone closing a window before a storm. She hung up. That was it. No yelling, no debate. Just a quiet rejection that somehow felt louder than anything we ever screamed at each other. For the next few days, I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't return texts. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat with it. The last thread between us had snapped without any force at all. I had spent years convincing myself that I didn't need closure. That moving on was as simple as staying busy. But something about that call made the silence louder, like it had been waiting all along to answer a question I didn't want to ask. I thought about calling back. I didn't. I thought about sending a message. I didn't. Instead, I opened the last photo album I took with me when I left. It only had a few pictures, birthday parties, school events, one awkward family vacation. It felt like looking through someone else's life. The call didn't change anything, but it made one thing very clear. Whatever version of me they remembered, whatever place I once held in that house, was long gone. I hadn't just left home. I had been erased from it. That's when I knew I wouldn't ask again, but I wasn't done understanding what happened either. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel confused. I just wanted to know the whole truth, even if I had to find it by myself. A few days after the call with my mother, I met up with my childhood friend at a late-night diner we used to hang out at back in high school. I didn't bring up the call right away. We talked about work, the food, the fact that the same old man was still running the cash register 20 years later. Eventually, I asked if he'd heard anything about my family. Not rumors, not gossip, just anything recent. He paused, then said my younger brother still lived at home. No job, no school. Just there, every day, doing nothing. Occasionally seen hanging around with the same two guys who used to skip classes with him. That was it. No major drama. No sudden change. Just more of the same. Driving back to my place that night, I considered reaching out to my father. For years, I'd lumped him in with my mother, mostly because he never stood up for me. He had a way of disappearing into silence when it mattered most. But something about the photo album I still kept, one where my father always stood on the edge of every group picture, not quite in or out, made me pause. Then I remembered that last night again. The way he stood in the hallway and watched me pack. No words, no stop, nothing. I dropped the idea. Instead, I called my mother's brother, the same uncle, who had always stayed neutral. He answered right away, but his tone gave away nothing. I asked if he knew why my mother shut down the way she did. He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "She still carries that day like a fresh bruise." That was all. No explanation, no elaboration, just that. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe something that would make the rejection make sense. Maybe a reason I could pretend was bigger than just pride. But there was nothing else, so I hung up and decided to stop waiting for someone else to offer clarity. The next morning, I got in my car and drove to my hometown. I didn't pack anything. I didn't even tell anyone I was going. I just drove, windows down, music low, with no plan. I parked across the street from the house I'd grown up in and sat there for almost an hour. The paint was new, the front yard had been replaced with gravel, a different car sat in the driveway, and the mailbox had been replaced with one of those wall-mounted types you see in rentals. I waited. After a while, the front door opened. My younger brother stepped out, phone in hand, talking to someone I couldn't see. He was older now, but his posture was the same, slouched, eyes scanning the ground. Two other guys followed him out. They got into a beat-up car and drove off. He didn't look in my direction once. I crossed the street, walked up to the door and knocked. After a minute, it opened. My father stood there. His hair was grayer. He looked thinner than I remembered. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry either, just surprised. He stepped out and closed the door behind him. We stood in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, "We're not ready. This isn't the way." That was it. No offer to talk. No question about how I was doing. No invitation to sit. Just a closed door, opened long enough to remind me it would stay that way. I nodded, turned around and walked back to my car. I didn't look back. The drive home felt longer than the drive there. 3 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I checked the peephole and saw my uncle standing there with a cardboard box. He didn't call ahead, didn't message, just showed up. I opened the door and let him in. He didn't say much, just placed the box on my kitchen table and stood there while I opened it. Inside was a photo album I hadn't seen in years. The red leather cover was worn, the edges cracked. I opened it slowly. Most of the photos were still in place. Birthdays, vacations, old holiday cards, but almost every photo of me was gone. You could still see the outline in some of the plastic sleeves where the pictures had been. One family photo at a theme park had a jagged tear where my face used to be. On the inside cover, taped down with yellowing tape, was a note in my mother's handwriting. "Closure comes in many forms." My uncle said nothing for a moment, then quietly added, "She didn't want it in the house anymore." He left not long after that. No dramatic goodbye. No lecture. Just a nod at the door, and then he was gone. I sat at the table and flipped through the album again. Every page felt like a chapter someone had rewritten without me. There was no fight, no explanation, just silence, cutouts, and a box delivered to my door like a return package. I didn't chase it after that. I didn't try again, but I also couldn't let it go just yet. Because somewhere along the line, the truth got buried, and if I wasn't going to be part of their story anymore, I at least wanted to understand how mine got rewritten. A few days after the photo album showed up, I reached out to a cousin I hadn't seen in years, my aunt's son. He lived with us briefly during his university years, and back then he was especially close to my mother. They shared long talks in the kitchen, late-night gossip, and he always seemed to understand her in a way no one else did. I figured if anyone still had a view into what was going on behind the scenes, it was him. I didn't ask anything over the phone. I just asked to meet. He agreed, but there was hesitation in his voice. We met at a cafe halfway between our cities. He looked older, tired, and a little nervous. We made small talk for a few minutes before I asked him directly if he knew why things had played out the way they did, why my mother had said what she said on the phone, why she sounded like someone reading from a script she'd rehearsed too many times. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned in and told me the version of the story my family had been telling for years. According to them, I had walked away during a family financial crisis, refused to help, cut them off cold, and vanished without a single explanation. My younger brother had apparently been led to believe that I abandoned the family during a crisis, without knowing what I was going through. The cousin admitted that my family's version of events had been repeated so often, it replaced any room for the real story. It had been repeated so many times that even my father stopped correcting it. Relatives who hadn't seen me in years assumed I was selfish, distant, and cold. Nobody ever heard what really happened, how I was asked, not gently, but forcefully expected to fund someone else's future before I'd even finished paying for my own past. How I was told to choose family over pride, like wanting to survive on my own, was some kind of betrayal. I didn't argue with him. I just pulled out my tablet and showed him a file I'd been putting together. Screenshots of messages, bank transfers, conversations, dates, receipts, a timeline of everything that led up to the fallout. Not because I wanted to prove anything to him, but because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. He scrolled through it slowly, silent the entire time. When he was done, he pushed the tablet back and said, "I believe you. But they've clung to the lie for too long. They won't let go of it now." We left it at that. No promises. No follow-ups. He walked to his car. I walked to mine. That was the last time we spoke. A week later, my landlord pulled me aside and asked if I was expecting any visitors. Apparently, someone had come by during work hours asking odd questions. If I still lived there, what unit I was in, whether I worked from home. The building manager didn't give any answers, just told them they'd have to leave a note or come back another time. No one left a note. I didn't have to guess who it was. Through my friend, I found out that my younger brother had somehow learned about the meeting with the cousin. No one knew how, but he was furious about it. Called it spreading private matters. Said I was turning people against the family. That same night, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "You crossed a line. Don't come back." I didn't respond. The number wasn't saved, and I blocked it immediately. There were no follow-ups, no more texts, no calls, just silence after that. What hit hardest wasn't the anger. It was the clarity. My family hadn't misunderstood what happened. They had chosen a version of it that suited them, one where I was the villain, one where everything that followed made sense because it started with me walking away. I stopped trying to make sense of it after that. I stopped hoping that time would soften anything. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I was done. The next weekend I boxed up the few things I had left from home. An old hoodie, a watch my father gave me at graduation, and the album with the torn-out pictures. I put them in the back of my closet, not because I needed to forget them, but because I no longer needed them in plain sight. I knew then that I didn't have to keep chasing a version of the story that was never going to be accepted. I had the truth. I had the timeline, and I had my own life to live. They could keep their story. I would start building mine, one where the past didn't get rewritten every time someone needed a villain. A week after the text from the unknown number, I got called into HR at work. They asked if I had a relative named Daniel, my brother's name. Apparently, someone using that name called the office line and tried to get my emergency contact information. Said it was for a family medical matter. The receptionist flagged it as suspicious and passed it to HR, who denied the request. They logged it, but didn't notify me until I checked in for something else. I filed a formal privacy request on the spot, asked them to mark my records as restricted, and made sure no information could be accessed without written consent. I also asked to be notified immediately if anyone else ever tried something similar. That same week, I started getting texts from numbers I didn't recognize. One message asked, "Do you miss your family yet?" Another said, "Still living alone?" No names. Just questions that felt too personal to be random. I changed my number that night and disabled call forwarding completely. I also updated all my two-factor authentication and locked down every account I could think of. I didn't want anything slipping through. 2 nights later, around 2:00 a.m., the buzzer to my apartment rang 5 times. No voice, just a long pause, and then another ring. I watched the screen but didn't answer. I waited 10 minutes, then checked the hallway. No one was there. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought a small camera for the front entrance. I asked the building manager to review the access logs from that night, but he said no codes had been used. It looked like someone waited outside until someone else exited and then tried to follow them in. 3 days later, an envelope showed up at the front desk of my office. It wasn't mailed, just dropped off. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence printed in block letters. "You were never needed." No name, no signature, no return address. I didn't report it yet. I wasn't sure it would lead to anything. But I scanned it, took photos, logged the date and time, and saved it all in a folder I'd started keeping for things like this. I printed 2 copies. One went in a locked drawer at home, the other in my glove box. That weekend, I took off for a few days and visited an old mentor, my college programming professor, who helped me get my first freelance gig years ago. We hadn't spoken in months, but he welcomed me like nothing had changed. We had dinner, talked about work, and sat outside after dark with coffee. I didn't share every detail, but I told him enough for him to understand the pressure I was under. He said something that stuck. "There's no winning with people who've already decided you're the villain. They'll always need you to lose." The next day, I drove back feeling different. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I needed to act instead of react. That night, I noticed my front door lock didn't feel right. The key went in too easily. I pulled it out, looked closer, and saw faint scratches around the keyhole. I tested the knob, it was still secure. Nothing inside had been touched. But someone had tried. I called the non-emergency police line, filed a report, and showed them the photos of the lock and the envelope from work. The officer took notes, asked a few questions, and told me to document anything else unusual that happened. He said they couldn't do much without more proof, but agreed the pattern was worth watching. The next day, I hired a locksmith to upgrade every lock in my apartment. Deadbolts, door chains, even the sliding windows. I also moved all deliveries to a post office box and set up notification alerts for anything left at the building. My old apartment doorbell was disconnected and replaced with a camera feed only I could access. That weekend, I made one final decision. I cut off the last 2 people who were still tied to my family, my uncle and my cousin. I didn't block them. I didn't send a message. I just deleted the threads, removed them from contacts, and locked down every way they could reach me. Not because they'd done anything recently, but because they were still tied to the same web, even if they didn't realize it. No more emotional backdoors. No more quiet check-ins. No more history that could be used as a way in. This wasn't just about protecting my space. It was about finally accepting that anyone who needed me to be the villain wouldn't stop until I was completely erased, or pushed to break. I wasn't giving them either. I stopped waiting for peace to come from people who were only ever comfortable with silence when it suited them. From now on, the only voice that mattered in this story was mine. Almost a full month passed without a single knock at the door, text message, or strange envelope. No middle of the night buzzing, no odd faces outside the building, nothing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was being watched from the corner of my own life. Then, a letter came, certified, with a law firm's logo stamped across the top. It was addressed to me, but the return address gave it away before I even opened it. The firm had been retained by my parents. Inside was a 3-page cease and desist letter filled with vague accusations, clearly meant to intimidate more than take action. It claimed that my false storytelling and deliberate attempts to provoke emotional harm had created unnecessary distress. It didn't accuse me of saying anything publicly, but implied that my actions, unspecified, had crossed a line. The tone wasn't just cold, it was condescending, like a lecture dressed in legal language. Without any attempt to speak or clarify, they sent a lawyer's letter, just an intimidation tactic without cause. I hadn't said a word to them. I hadn't spoken about them in any public space. All I'd done was protect myself, tighten locks, reroute mail, walk away from connections that had gone stale. But even silence, it seemed, wasn't quiet enough for them. They didn't just want distance, they wanted erasure. I scanned the letter, filed a digital copy, then made an appointment with a legal contact I trusted, a friend of my mentor who handled civil disputes. She read through the letter twice and said it was nothing more than an intimidation tactic. Unless they escalated, the best move was no move. Don't respond, don't feed it, just document everything. I did more than that. I took the photos from the lock tampering, the workplace envelope, the unknown messages, and added them to a growing file. I organized it all, printed 2 full versions, and placed one in a secure deposit box downtown. The other stayed at home, under lock and key. That weekend, I signed up for volunteer work through a community group I'd seen advertised near my gym. They ran weekend programs for displaced teenagers, mostly young adults who had aged out of foster care or were trying to get back on their feet. I didn't have some big speech or savior complex. I just wanted to be around people who wanted help. People who saw help as something you earned, not something you demanded. The sessions started small, resume workshops, coding basics, budget planning. I didn't talk about my story. I just showed up on time, stayed late, and brought extra chargers when someone's laptop battery ran out. Every hour I spent there made it harder to feel invisible. At one event, a distant family acquaintance showed up. A woman who used to live a few doors down from us when I was a kid. She smiled, walked up like we'd just run into each other at the grocery store, and asked how I was doing. I didn't say much, just nodded, thanked her for stopping by, and stepped away. There was nothing else to say. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. No postage. Hand-delivered again. Inside was a sheet of paper. This one handwritten, "You always thought you were better than us." I brought it straight to the police, same officer from before. He added it to the file, this time calling it part of an escalating pattern. He advised installing motion-sensitive lights near the hallway entrance and updating my security camera software. 2 days after that, I got a call from a legal assistant from the same law firm that had sent the cease and desist. The tone was formal, almost bored. My mother's will had been updated and filed. I was officially disinherited. The assistant added that the new will included a clause suggesting any contact from me could legally affect the estate distribution, though it was likely unenforceable. The implication was clear: stay gone, or it costs someone else. There wasn't anything left to process. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even ask for a copy. That night, I opened the drawer with the last box of family photos, old prints from birthdays, school plays, and beach vacations. I didn't burn them. I didn't rip them up. I just removed them, one by one, and placed them in a folder. Then I slid the folder into the bottom of a plastic storage bin and pushed it to the back of my closet. There was no rage, no grief, just space. Space where a name used to be. Space where a family used to live. Space I could finally use for something else. The disinheritance didn't come as a shock. What stood out wasn't the money, it was the effort. The signatures, the legal language, the clause warning me not to reach out or I'd jeopardize someone else's share. They didn't just cut me out. They wanted proof of it on paper, filed away somewhere official, in case anyone ever asked. I followed up with the same legal contact who reviewed the cease and desist earlier. She went over the will, pointed out the restrictive language, and explained that contesting it would be both expensive and emotionally draining. Even if I won, which was unlikely, it would drag me right back into a cycle I'd spent years pulling myself out of. I didn't argue. I told her I had no intention of fighting it. A few days later, I took a quiet drive to my old neighborhood. I didn't park right away. I circled the block twice before stopping a few houses down from where we used to live. The house looked different. The siding had been redone, the lawn had been stripped to gravel, and the windows were now barred. There was a large "Beware of Dogs" sign posted on the front gate. Nothing about it looked like the place I grew up in. I stepped out and walked down the sidewalk once, just to look at it from the other side. As I turned around, a woman watering her plants across the street waved. I recognized her vaguely from when I was a teenager. She looked at me, paused, then said, "Your mother told us you left and never called again." Shame, really. I didn't answer. There was no point. Truth doesn't matter when a lie has been told long enough to feel like history. Later that afternoon, I visited the cemetery where my grandparents are buried. They were the only 2 people in my family who ever gave without keeping score. I cleaned the edges of their markers, left 2 fresh flowers, and sat quietly for a few minutes. Nothing dramatic, no big realization, just stillness. When I got back to my car, There was another note under the wiper blade. No envelope. Just folded once, facing up, still haunting the past. Just leave already. I looked around. No one nearby. The parking lot was nearly empty. I took the note, photographed it against the background of my license plate, then opened my glove compartment and added it to the folder I'd been keeping. Back home, I backed up all the photos, timestamps, and the log of locations. This time, I didn't wait. The next morning, I went to the police department and asked to speak directly with the officer who handled my last report. I gave him everything: the new note, the visit to the cemetery, the earlier threats, the workplace drop-offs, and the lock tampering from weeks before. I laid it out step by step in order, with documentation to back every claim. He didn't brush it off this time. He took notes, asked detailed questions, and said there was enough to open a formal harassment case file. He gave me a list of next steps, including logging all future movements in and out of the apartment, reporting any suspicious activity near my mailbox, and adding plate numbers of unfamiliar vehicles. He also advised requesting access to camera footage from public places like the cemetery and nearby businesses, in case something was recorded. Back home, I added new routines. Small things at first: changing my walking routes, switching gym times, keeping a second phone powered down in my glove box in case something went wrong. At the gym, I started pushing harder. I showed up early, stayed late, focused more on sparring rounds. Not because I felt unsafe, but because I needed to remind myself I wasn't fragile, that I didn't need permission to feel grounded again. One night after training, while wiping down the bench, my coach asked what had me coming in so much lately. I told him the short version. No dramatics, just the facts. Cut off by family, being followed, unwanted contact, and years of feeling like a ghost in a story someone else was telling. He didn't say much, just stood up, grabbed his towel, and looked at me. Then he said, "You didn't lose your family. You walked away from the people who were keeping you from finding one." That was the first time in years someone put it into words that didn't feel like a wound, just a fact, like putting down a box that was never yours to carry in the first place. A week after handing in the full harassment file, the officer called back and said they'd assigned a private investigator to follow up. Not standard procedure, but given the pattern, surveillance, anonymous messages, the cemetery incident, they saw enough to treat it as a serious case. The investigator reached out 2 days later, set a time to meet, and asked for access to all the digital records I'd compiled. We went through everything: photos, timestamps, delivery logs, security footage clips. He asked about my routines, who knew my schedule, and what had changed recently. A few days later, he called with an early report. The findings were worse than I expected. Someone had been tracking me on and off for months. Not constantly, not enough to be obvious, but just enough to stay close, without crossing the line into criminal trespass. The notes, the visit to my workplace, the cemetery, each was timed around periods when my guard was down: early mornings, late nights, holidays. The investigator said the precision meant one thing: whoever it was had access to old personal details. Not just my address, but my patterns, my habits. This wasn't random. He ran an analysis on the handwriting from all the notes I'd submitted. He said they came from the same person: consistent pressure points, identical letter spacing, and a specific downward stroke on the lowercase es. Police began assembling a formal case file from there. While organizing my files to hand off more documentation, I found something I hadn't noticed before: an old email buried in a filtered folder. It was from my father, sent 2 years ago, never opened. The message was brief, no subject line, no greeting, just a cold, half-hearted paragraph. He said they regretted how things turned out, but admitted they never tried to fix it because it would make us look weak. He mentioned my mother told him not to reach out again. She didn't want to reignite false hope. I printed it out and slid it into the same folder as the other documents. Not because I needed to keep it, but because it was a reminder. The silence hadn't been about confusion or distance. It had been intentional. The door stayed shut not because it got stuck, but because they locked it. That week at the gym, the receptionist flagged me down before a session. A man had come by asking questions: what time I usually trained, if I still used the same locker, whether I worked there part-time. She didn't answer anything, just turned him away. He left without giving a name. I notified the manager, explained the ongoing situation, and asked if they'd consider changing guest protocols. They agreed to tighten check-in rules and review footage of the incident. I updated the police, added the gym report to the case file, and made one more change. I stopped using my name on new delivery accounts and routed every package through a secure locker downtown. All mail moved to the P.O. box. I deleted the old forwarding address. My trainer noticed I'd started spending less time on physical drills and more time sitting quietly between rounds. After our session, he gave me the number of someone he trusted, a trauma-informed coach who worked with people dealing with estrangement and long-term family conflict. I reached out, booked a slot, and started weekly sessions. The first one was mostly silence. The second wasn't much different. By the third, I talked about the recurring dream I kept having: walking through the front door of my old house, only for my mother to smile and turn away as if I wasn't even there. The coach asked if I'd ever written it all down. Not just the facts, but the things I never got to say. That night, I sat down with a pen and paper. No typing, just writing. I filled 8 pages. Didn't stop once. I didn't edit. I didn't reread. The next morning, I got in my car, drove out past the city to a hill I used to visit during college, quiet, surrounded by trees, with just enough wind to carry smoke. I stood by the edge, lit a match, and watched the pages burn one by one. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just let the flames finish what words couldn't. That night, for the first time in over a year, I slept through without waking up once. No noise, no buzzers, no dreams, just stillness. A few weeks passed in complete silence. No envelopes under the door, no buzzing in the middle of the night, no messages from unknown numbers. Even the gym stayed quiet, no strangers asking questions, no lingering looks. It was the longest calm stretch I'd had in years. Like the air had finally cleared after being held under water too long. Later that week, I got a call from my childhood friend, one of the only people who still had my number. He didn't push. Just asked if I'd be open to meeting someone for one last conversation. My cousin, the one who had once vouched for me. He said the cousin had something important to say and had reached out to him because he wasn't sure how to contact me directly anymore. I agreed, but with rules. 1 hour, public place, no bringing anyone else. If anything felt wrong, I'd walk. We met at a small cafe in the middle of a public park, outdoors, open space, people nearby. The cousin was already sitting when I arrived, tapping one knee rapidly under the table. He looked nervous, more than before. We didn't shake hands, just sat. He started talking without much preamble. Said he hadn't known how deep things had gone, or how far the family had taken it after I left. He admitted that he thought things might settle down on their own. That time would smooth things over like it did with most family fights. It hadn't. Then he told me the truth. The notes, the workplace incidents, the gym visit, my younger brother was behind all of it. He had spiraled over the last year, obsessed with the idea that I owed him a future, that I took something that belonged to him. When the cousin met me months earlier, my brother found out and saw it as betrayal. That's when the stalking started. That's when he began following my routines. The cousin said he tried to intervene but got shut out. The rest of the family didn't want to hear about it. The story had already been set. Changing it now would mean admitting they'd gotten it wrong for years. I didn't say much. I let him talk. When he finished, I thanked him for the honesty, stood up and left. I didn't need more. I had all the pieces now. That was enough. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. I brought the investigator's report, all the notes, the timeline, and added a new witness statement outlining the cousin's admission. The judge issued a provisional order the same day. My brother was now officially on a no-contact list. Any attempt to reach me, physically or electronically, would result in escalation. After filing the paperwork, I met with my coach for our regular session. He adjusted the week's focus and suggested I spend more time away from screens. Less news, more structure. I picked up hiking on the weekends, simple trails, early morning walks before the city woke up. I started journaling, not for therapy but to build rhythm, not reflection, just structure. One morning on the trail, I passed a man coming down the opposite side and did a double take. He looked up and smiled first. It was my old high school teacher. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. He stopped, put his hands on his hips, and just looked at me. "You were always the one who asked the hardest questions," he said. "Now I see you lived them too." We didn't say much more, just nodded, and kept walking in opposite directions. That short exchange stuck with me. I went home and opened a blank document, wrote chapter 1 at the top, then kept going. Not to publish, not to post, not even for closure. Just to write the story on my terms, without edits from anyone else. A record for myself that couldn't be torn, rewritten, or boxed up with someone else's label on it. The writing became part of my daily routine. Not long sessions, just 30 minutes each morning, like stretching before a workout. Sometimes more. It gave me a place to put the memories without having to carry them around. Each chapter pulled a piece out of the fog, not just the big moments, the arguments, the letters, the legal threats, but the quiet ones too. The silence between calls. The stillness after the final note. The sound of a door not slamming, just staying closed. And for the first time in a long while, nothing needed to be fixed. Just written. Just put somewhere safe. A few weeks after filing the temporary restraining order, the gym security footage caught my younger brother standing across the street, leaning on a light pole for nearly 20 minutes without going inside. He didn't speak to anyone or cross the entrance, just watched the doors then walked off. The camera angle captured his face clearly. I handed the footage to the police the same day. The court reviewed the report and made the restraining order permanent. Any future contact, physical or digital, would result in jail time. That warning must have landed. Since then, there hasn't been a single sighting. My landlord, after being updated on the situation, brought in a contractor to install a full security system across the building. Keypad entry, motion-sensitive lights, and door cameras on every floor. The entire building benefited, and the tenants pulled together to help cover part of the cost. For the first time in a long time, the apartment felt like mine again, not just a place I stayed to avoid being found. At my next therapy session, the counselor suggested we taper things off. The session wasn't rushed. There wasn't some dramatic breakthrough. She just said my compass seemed steady now. I agreed. By that point, my memoir had passed 60,000 words. I wasn't writing every day anymore, just when something needed to be put down. I shared it with 2 people, my trainer and the mentor who took me in all those years ago. Neither offered commentary or critique. They both read it quietly, then looked at me with something between respect and relief. Not pride, something deeper, like acknowledgement. A few weeks later, my workplace held a community fundraiser. Nothing huge, just a weekend event with booths and speakers. Someone asked if I'd be willing to share a little about my path, just a short talk about resilience. I said yes. When I spoke, I kept it simple. I didn't use names. I didn't tell the audience about the stalking, or the legal letters, or the boxes full of erased memories. I just told them what happens when you lose your place in a story someone else wrote, and decide to write your own instead. A few people came up afterward, thanked me, and asked nothing more. 3 days after the event, another envelope arrived. No return address. Plain paper. Inside was a single line, handwritten. I still don't understand, but I'm sorry. I knew the handwriting. It was my father's. I didn't reply. I didn't tell anyone about it. But I didn't throw it away either. I opened the drawer where I'd stored the old photo album with the missing pictures, and the printed copy of his email from years ago. I slid the note in next to them and closed it. That drawer wasn't for hate or hurt. It was just where I kept things that didn't have anywhere else to go. A week later, the last loose thread tried to pull itself back in. My cousin emailed me, saying their mother was terminally ill. He said the family was open to reconciliation, and wanted to know if I'd consider coming back for a final visit. I didn't reply. I blocked the email and cleared the message. There was no hesitation. Some bridges burn once. Some people light them twice. The same month, a few of my newer friends, people I'd met through the community center, the gym, and weekend hikes, organized a surprise birthday gathering. Nothing fancy, no cake with names, just good food, soft music, and people who didn't know my past and didn't need to. No one asked why I left home. No one mentioned where I came from. They asked what I wanted for the year ahead. I told them I hadn't thought about it. Later that night, someone handed me a glass and asked if I wanted to make a toast. I kept it short. I said, healing doesn't always come from going back. Sometimes it's about building forward with who shows up now. That was enough. The story didn't end with a dramatic reunion or a tearful apology. It ended with a quiet room, people laughing at small things, music playing through secondhand speakers, and a man who wasn't lost anymore, just writing his life, this time for real. I'm a 33-year-old man, and until recently I thought I had built a future for myself. Literally. I spent nearly 5 years of my life pouring every ounce of time, money, and effort into building a house on a piece of land in the countryside that had been in our family for generations. It was my late grandfather's land, held in my father's name after he passed. When I was in my mid-20s, my father told me that the land was meant for family use, and if I wanted to build a house there, I could, as long as I paid for everything myself. That included materials, labor, permits, and utilities. Nothing would be funded or gifted. I agreed. For years, I took on extra shifts, freelance work, and saved as aggressively as I could. I stopped traveling, rarely ate out, and bought nothing unless it was essential. Every rupee I saved went into that house. I kept a binder with printed receipts, photos of every stage of construction, and notes on each material purchase. I got verbal approval from both my parents before laying the first brick. They visited the site multiple times and even brought relatives over on weekends, smiling and nodding as I showed them the floor plans and discussed the wiring layout or water tank setup. Sometimes, distant relatives would visit and joke about how the house looked too nice to be temporary, or ask if I was sure it was mine. I chalked it up to the way older family members talk. Vague jokes that never lead anywhere. I didn't think too much of it. It took me just under 5 years to finish the house. It was modest, nothing flashy but solid. 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a tiled roof that could handle storm season, water tanks on the side, solar panels on top. I installed proper fencing, dug a garden space in the back, and paid out of pocket for every permit and inspection. The final touches were small but meaningful. Window grills with a design I'd drawn myself, a handmade bench out front, and a tool shed I built from leftover materials. Once I moved in, things finally slowed down. I started sleeping better. The peace of living in a space I had built with my own hands was something I hadn't experienced before. My family would sometimes ask to host small get-togethers on the property, birthdays, dinners, or weekend barbecues. I said yes every time. They'd bring food and chairs, and people would compliment how well I'd done for myself. My father once clapped me on the back and called the place a blessing to the family. My mother called it proof of real grit. That continued for 2 years. I paid the taxes, cleaned the septic tank, maintained the fencing when a storm tore through it. I added lights along the driveway, a little outdoor stove beside the garden, and installed a better filter on the water supply. The neighbors started recognizing me as the one who built that place from scratch. Then, my younger brother got engaged. He's 5 years younger than me, lives in the city, and has always been the one my parents hover over. They began planning a big traditional wedding, multiple events, out-of-town guests, the whole thing. One afternoon, I was at my parents' house when my mother mentioned how convenient it would be to host the wedding on my land. She called it the ideal venue, then added, so much family history and it's so picturesque now. I didn't object. It sounded like they wanted to use the garden and yard space. I even offered to clear up some things if needed. The week before the wedding, my father visited me and said the decorators needed full access and it would be best if I stayed elsewhere for a few nights. He assured me it was only temporary, and they'd make sure everything was respected. I agreed, packed a few essentials, and stayed at a friend's apartment in town. The day after the wedding, I returned to find my key didn't work. I thought it was a mistake until I saw my brother and his new wife inside, unpacking. I stood outside the gate for a moment, confused, before my parents arrived. My father told me, in front of them, that the house had been gifted to the newlyweds. He said it was part of their wedding blessing, and that it had always been the plan. My mother added that I was making it awkward and should be happy for them. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I left. That night I sat down and opened my folder, my receipts, my permits, my handwritten notes, everything. I realized that I had been building a home while everyone else saw me building a temporary stage. I started printing everything, backing up every document, and listing every name of workers, suppliers, and contractors I had dealt with. The next morning I began making calls, not to my parents, not to my brother, to a lawyer. The day after I started gathering all my documents, I called my parents and asked for a face-to-face meeting, just the four of us. My father told me to come by that evening. When I arrived, my younger brother was already there with his wife. No one offered tea. We sat around the dining table like strangers. I asked them to explain clearly how a house I built had suddenly become someone else's wedding gift. My mother said they made the decision as a family. My father added that my brother was starting a new chapter and needed a stable home. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You're still single. You can always start over." My brother didn't speak. He just kept looking at the table. I asked for paperwork, any legal documentation that showed a transfer of ownership. They couldn't provide anything. I reminded them that I had paid for everything, every brick, every pipe, every permit. My father waved it off. He said it had all been an informal conversation, that they never promised anything in writing. My mother chimed in again, saying this was about the family's future and not holding on to things that divide us. I pulled out a folder I had brought with me and laid it on the table. Inside were printed receipts, dated photographs of the build, annotated floor plans, and a handwritten timeline of the entire project. My father barely glanced at them. He said I was letting money poison my thinking. My mother said I was focusing too much on ownership and not enough on togetherness. My brother never once looked up. The conversation ended with my father standing up and telling me I was putting material things above blood. I didn't argue. I packed up my folder, said nothing, and left. Later that night, one of my cousins messaged me. He had been at the wedding and told me something that made everything click. A few weeks before the ceremony, my brother and his fiancée had been visiting the house regularly, looking around, pointing at things, even meeting with someone from a furniture company. Apparently, my parents had already told them it would be theirs. My cousin said he hadn't believed it at first, but then he was invited to a dinner where the gifting plan was discussed openly. I wasn't invited. This wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't some rushed last-minute surprise. It was a quiet plan they had been building behind my back while I thought I was building a life. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a property lawyer. I didn't go there to get the house back. I already knew the land was never in my name, but I wanted to know what rights I had regarding everything I had built. The structure, the labor, the years of investment. I brought the full folder in a flash drive with digital backups. The lawyer looked through everything carefully. He didn't promise anything yet but said there might be a case worth pursuing. After that, my focus shifted. I stopped talking to my parents. I didn't return my brother's messages. I didn't want apologies or explanations. I started listing out everything I had spent: material, labor, custom design work, utilities, even the tools I had left in the shed. If they wanted to erase me from the picture, fine, but I wasn't going to let them walk away with everything like I never existed. That weekend, I returned briefly to the town near the property. I didn't go to the house. I stayed at the same friend's apartment and spent the time building out a full record. Calls to vendors, duplicate copies of invoices, emails confirming deliveries. I even got in touch with the carpenter who had helped me install the back deck and asked if he still had the work order. He did. I also started collecting screenshots, texts from my parents praising the house. Old photos where my father was helping me carry bricks, my mother planting flowers near the front steps. There was even a short video clip from 2 years ago, when my father had proudly called the house my son's legacy project during a family barbecue. I wasn't interested in fighting them in their own language anymore. I wasn't going to argue about loyalty or tradition or family. That path had already been closed off. From this point forward, it would be about one thing: recovering what was mine. If the house couldn't be returned, then the value of it would be, brick by brick, rupee by rupee. At the next meeting with my lawyer, I got the confirmation I expected. Since the land title was never in my name and still belonged to my father, the house, by law, was considered part of the property. Technically, that meant it defaulted to him, even though every single part of the house was built using my time, money, and labor. But the lawyer introduced something I hadn't known about: unjust enrichment. He explained that even though my name wasn't on the deed, there was legal precedent for recovering funds in cases where one party clearly benefited at another's expense without fair compensation. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but he said the documentation I had collected gave me a solid foundation to move forward. I started gathering everything in one place: digital backups of receipts, physical copies, screenshots of messages, even photos where my parents were standing next to me during different phases of the construction. I found an old voice note buried in our family group chat. My father was showing the house to a guest and called it my son's legacy project. I saved that file in 3 different places. The lawyer warned me that if I filed a legal notice, it would spark tension not just with my parents and brother, but with the entire extended family. I told him I didn't care about family opinions anymore. I signed the documents and gave him the green light to send a formal notice demanding financial compensation based on construction costs, labor, and material. Word spread faster than I expected. Within days, I started getting calls and messages from uncles, aunts, and distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. They weren't asking what had happened, they were trying to convince me to drop it. I heard the same phrases repeated over and over. It's just a house. Don't let money ruin the family. He's your younger brother. I didn't respond to any of it. I stopped picking up calls from family altogether and left unread anything that mentioned the house. About a week later, my father showed up at my office. No appointment. He walked straight in past the receptionist and tried to talk to me like we were just having a disagreement. He tried to discuss settling the issue before the court restriction was filed, asking me to settle this privately and stop making things ugly. I told building security to escort him out. They did. The following week, I received a letter at my apartment. No name, no return address. Just a printed note that read, "You are a disgrace to the family name. This is your shame to carry." I handed it over to my lawyer, who told me to keep a record of everything. Around the same time, I started hearing from friends in town who had no idea what had really happened. They were under the impression that I had given the house to my brother as a wedding gift. Someone had told them I had moved on and wanted a clean break. When one friend joked about me being the most generous sibling ever, I knew I had to get out of town. I moved into a small one-bedroom rental in a different neighborhood. No one there knew me or my family. I kept quiet, worked during the day, and spent my evenings organizing files. I printed timelines, sorted invoices, and created a spreadsheet with everything down to the cost of nails and caulk. I contacted vendors to request duplicate receipts. I found the contractor who helped with the solar panel installation and asked for a signed statement. He agreed. Meanwhile, my brother and his wife started renovating the house. Photos surfaced through a neighbor, new paint, new fixtures and garden furniture I never bought. They had taken down the handmade bench I built. The tool shed had been cleared out. The window grills I designed were replaced with store-bought ones. My lawyer said it didn't affect the core of our case, but I cataloged everything anyway. Every change they made only confirmed how permanent they believed their position was. I stayed focused. I added the voice note from the group chat to the case file, along with dated messages from my father encouraging me to invest in our future home. I included screenshots of my mother praising the landscaping. I filed my tax documents showing property maintenance costs. My lawyer told me the case might stretch out for months, maybe longer, but said the family's own paper trail might end up doing most of the work for us. That night, I started thinking back to things I hadn't really noticed before. Jokes made by relatives, comments about how I wasn't in a hurry to settle down, how my brother was the one who'd keep the family going. It started to feel less like a betrayal and more like a slow removal. I wasn't just pushed out of the house, I was being pushed out of the story, out of the version of the family they wanted to present. The case was moving forward, and I wasn't stopping until they either returned what I built or paid the price for taking it. My lawyer drafted and served a formal legal notice demanding full reimbursement for the construction costs of the house. We laid out everything: receipts, photo records, voice messages, and documentation showing years of investment. The claim wasn't based on land ownership, but on what had been built, paid for, and improved entirely by me. A week later, my parents responded through their own lawyer. The response claimed that the house was always intended to be a collective family gift, and that no written promise had ever been made. According to them, I had built the home with an understanding that it would serve the family as needed. They denied any wrongdoing and rejected the idea of repayment. My lawyer wasn't surprised. He advised filing a civil claim under unjust enrichment, supported by both the financial trail and the long-term behavior of my parents. We compiled new files. Voice messages from old family group chats were extracted, recordings where my father had referred to the house as his future, and proof of a hardworking man. They weren't offhand compliments, they were acknowledgments of ownership and effort. We also brought in a childhood friend of mine who had spent multiple weekends helping me pour cement and assemble wood frames. He agreed to submit a sworn affidavit confirming I handled every purchase and task. He remembered me bringing lunch in a paper bag every weekend just to save money on site. In the middle of this, my brother's lawyer reached out with an offer, a symbolic payment. It was small, barely covering even the basic structural costs, let alone the full build. They framed it as a gesture of goodwill, as if that would close the matter. I declined and told my lawyer to make it clear. No further communication would happen outside of formal legal channels. 2 days later, my cousin sent me photos from a private family gathering. It was a celebration hosted by my parents to mark the official handover of the house to my brother and his wife. They had invited extended family. There were balloons, decorations, and a custom cake with the words "Home Sweet Home Forever" iced across the top. I wasn't invited. No one from that side even mentioned it to me before or after. I forwarded the images to my lawyer. That was the moment we agreed to escalate. I authorized him to move forward with the full claim. We brought in a professional engineer to assess the market value of the home and improvements. The report showed not only the structure's value but how it had increased the overall worth of the land itself. Soon after that, I started hearing that my parents were calling distant relatives and mutual friends. They were saying that I was trying to tear the family apart over property greed. They told people I was trying to sue them out of anger, not justice. Some of those people reached out to me directly. I didn't respond. I had already decided anyone trying to sway me emotionally wouldn't be part of my life moving forward. But not all responses were negative. One evening, a retired uncle, someone who had distanced himself from family drama years ago, called me. He asked for my lawyer's contact and then submitted a signed affidavit. In it, he stated that years ago at a family dinner, he'd heard my father say that whichever son settled down first would get the house. That contradicted everything my parents had been claiming publicly, that the house had no intended owner, that it was for the family, that I'd misunderstood. That document became a critical piece of evidence in our file. With all this collected, the court scheduled a preliminary hearing. My lawyer started coordinating with witnesses and compiling everything into a structured narrative, one that showed planning, effort, and deliberate erasure. The timeline was solid. The money trail was complete. Testimonies were building up. I spent the next several days preparing statements and arranging for the professional assessments to be reviewed in court. I didn't visit the village again. I didn't look at new photos of the house. But I checked every day with my legal team to make sure we were leaving no room for surprises. They had taken the house. That part was done. But they were going to pay for what they stole. Through court, through records, and through every lie they thought no one would remember. Just before the preliminary hearing, I started receiving updates from a neighbor who lived 2 plots over from the house. He sent me photos taken from his balcony, fresh paint on the exterior, newly paved tiles in the front yard, and a pergola being installed where the kitchen herb patch used to be. Inside shots showed the bedroom I had hand-paneled with wood from a friend's mill being torn down and replaced with store-bought panels. The handmade shelves I had fitted in the living room were gone, replaced by glossy units. They were changing everything. I made a short trip to the village that weekend, not to see the house, but to meet with a surveyor we had lined up as a witness. He examined the photos I brought and walked through my documented floor plans and material receipts. He agreed to testify on the material value and labor tied specifically to the custom elements that had been removed or altered. On my way out of the village, I ran into my mother near the market. I ran into her by chance near the market. She raised her voice loud enough for others to stop and stare. She called me a disgrace, accused me of dragging the family's name through the mud, and said I was ripping apart something sacred. I didn't respond. I pulled out my phone, recorded the last few seconds of it, then left. I sent the clip to my lawyer. He added it to the case file and told me we were now building a secondary record, one focused on defamation and harassment in case the emotional pressure escalated further. That week, my brother's wife posted on her public account, thanking the family for this beautiful start to our married life. The post included photos of the redecorated home, tagged with words like new beginnings and forever grateful. I saved the screenshots and sent them to my legal team. My lawyer flagged them as relevant, especially since they directly contradicted their earlier claim that the house had always been shared family property. Days later, their lawyer sent a new offer, partial repayment. The number was laughably low, less than half of what even basic materials had cost, let alone labor and design. They said it was meant to put the matter to rest without further embarrassment. I rejected it. Around the same time, I heard through a friend that a new rumor was being passed around among older relatives, that I had only built the house as a short-term investment, planning to sell it from the beginning. I wasn't surprised. That lie was easy to disprove. I submitted my renovation sketches, which included notes on where I'd install permanent shelving for tool storage. I provided tax filings that showed residence declarations and included documentation from a solar rebate program tied to long-term occupancy. We even attached an old email from the municipal office, showing my request for garbage pickup and recycling services under residential use. A former neighbor, who now lived in the city, submitted a signed statement verifying that I had lived on site consistently for over 2 years. He recalled seeing me every morning, out watering the plants or dragging gravel by hand to extend the driveway. He also remembered seeing me repair the gate lock after a storm took it off its hinges. Shortly after, we received confirmation from the court. The petition had been accepted, and a full hearing was scheduled. Both legal teams were officially notified. There was no more talking around it. This would go to trial. The same day, I noticed that all digital family groups, on messaging apps, shared calendars, even a shared photo album we'd had for years, were quietly deleted. Not a word from anyone. They were cutting off access to updates, conversations, and photos. The way it was handled told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want me to see how they were preparing behind closed doors. I doubled down on prep. I finalized all receipts, reprinted material quotes from vendors I had used, and reached out to the laborers I'd hired in the early phases. 2 of them agreed to provide written confirmation of payment and scope of work. One of them even offered to testify in person if needed. My lawyer said it wasn't necessary but appreciated the offer. Through a friend at the local municipality, I secured written proof that all permits, zoning, water, septic, solar, had been applied for and funded directly by me. The letter carried the municipal stamp and was signed by the official overseeing building approvals for that region. Around this time, a local journalist reached out to my lawyer asking for comment. The case was starting to catch attention. I gave no statements, but we kept records of the inquiry, just in case any coverage came up that could influence the court or sway public opinion. My legal team began quietly preparing for trial-level escalation. Everything was stacking up: documents, photos, voice clips, public posts, testimonies. If they thought this was just a family dispute, they were about to find out what building a case actually looked like. A court-appointed mediator reached out and scheduled a mandatory session for both parties. The goal was to avoid trial if any kind of settlement could be reached. My lawyer and I arrived with the full file, contracts, receipts, visual logs, and statements from vendors, neighbors, and relatives. On the other side, my parents arrived with their legal representative. My brother and his wife sat at the far end of the table, quiet at first. From the beginning, my parents repeated their position that nothing had ever been promised in writing. They framed the house as a shared family asset, something fluid and intended to serve family needs as they changed. My lawyer responded with a timeline that tracked every purchase, delivery, and labor expense over the 5 years it took to build. I played a voice clip where my father, during a family event, proudly called the house his son's project built by his own hands. We showed annotated floor plans with unique customizations and a paper trail of personal payments. No shared accounts, no funding from them. The mediator reviewed everything and proposed a compromise, a 70% reimbursement based on the construction value of the house minus depreciation. My parents declined. They countered with an offer of 25%, claiming emotional harm and irreparable trust breakdowns as reasons not to go higher. Halfway through the session, my brother finally spoke. He said he hadn't fully understood that I had paid for everything myself. He claimed he was told it was a shared family build and thought our parents had helped. My lawyer presented dated photos showing him and his wife selecting custom tile finishes. I had ordered months earlier. There were text exchanges with vendors showing her approvals. After that, my brother didn't speak again. The mediation session ended without agreement. Both sides walked out preparing for full litigation. The very next morning, my mother published a blog post. It wasn't private, it was linked to her real name and titled, "When Family Becomes the Enemy of the Home." In it, she described her son, me, as someone who had put bricks and drywall over blood. She accused me of chasing money and embarrassing the family name for selfish reasons. Within hours, someone forwarded the post to my workplace. HR called me into a meeting later that day for a wellness check. They had received an anonymous email containing a link to the blog and a vague warning that I might be undergoing mental stress. I explained the situation, then filed a formal complaint with our internal department to investigate the source of the message. My employer opened a privacy review, and my lawyer sent a cease and desist letter regarding the blog. We also began preparing a secondary legal action focused on reputational damage and targeted online defamation, ensuring all evidence met civil case standards. My lawyer collected screenshots, archived the blog, and requested IP logs from the host platform. It was clear this was no longer just about the house. They were trying to discredit me publicly. That week, a childhood neighbor reached out. He said he had been following everything from a distance and apologized for staying quiet. He offered a statement confirming that years ago he'd heard my father explicitly tell a group of family friends that the house was being built as a foundation for my older son's future. He recalled my father talking about how proud he was that I was building it alone, without needing help. The neighbor agreed to submit his statement through our legal team. The affidavit was reviewed and added to our growing file. My lawyer flagged it as especially valuable because it wasn't from family, it was an external voice with no emotional stake in the outcome. That kind of testimony, especially in civil court, carried weight. I relocated that weekend. I found a quiet rented unit just outside the city. It had 2 rooms, a simple kitchen, and decent cell signal, enough to work from home when needed. I left no forwarding address with anyone except my legal team and employer. The closer the trial got, the more I wanted to be out of reach. In the evenings, I reviewed every document again, contractor logs, photographs from construction, permit approvals, payment records. I highlighted inconsistencies in my parents' previous statements and updated my timeline with new witness entries. The trial date was confirmed. It was approaching fast. There were no more calls, no more messages from family, no back channels. I stopped wondering what they were thinking. At this point, it wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about facts, paper trails, and standing my ground. They had taken something physical from me, but now it would be recorded under oath who built it, who paid for it, and who tried to rewrite the story after the work was done. My lawyer submitted the complete evidence package to the court 1 week before the trial date. The file included printed and digital records, sworn statements from neighbors, receipts for every material purchase, annotated photos tracking progress from foundation to final paint, and the signed affidavit from the childhood neighbor who recalled my father's past declarations of the house being built for me. Everything was cataloged and cross-referenced with timelines, proving labor investment, financial responsibility, and intent. In response, the opposing lawyer argued that verbal promises held no legal ground. Their defense leaned entirely on the title deed, claiming the land had always been in my father's name and that no official agreement ever transferred ownership of the structure. My legal team focused instead on long-term behavior, financial contributions, and documented acknowledgments. They made the case that ownership wasn't about what was said in one moment. It was about the consistent way I had been treated as the rightful builder and caretaker of that home over a period of years. We submitted new CCTV footage gathered from a neighbor's property. It showed me hauling cement bags, lumber, and insulation boards up the path to the site over months of weekends. In one clip, I was unloading gravel with a rented wheelbarrow. In another, I was stacking roofing tiles. The footage spanned different seasons and clearly showed the level of personal labor I had put in. There were no contractors, no construction team, just me. A breakdown was also submitted that compared hours worked to money spent. It tracked everything from initial groundwork to final paint. It showed that, aside from a few specialty installations like solar wiring and plumbing, I had done everything with my own 2 hands. My lawyer highlighted the ratio between labor and materials, pointing out how much lower the total cost had been because I didn't hire out the work. A planning department official submitted a statement confirming that all permits, utility requests, and inspection fees were filed and paid under my name, clarifying this didn't transfer land ownership. The official clarified that while the land title was held by my father, every permit listed me as the responsible party. This distinction, though subtle, added weight to the argument that I had acted and been treated as the de facto owner of the structure itself. The opposing lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the case, claiming the court didn't have sufficient grounds to continue. The judge reviewed the submissions and denied the motion. He stated that the evidence presented met the threshold for trial, and noted that the material investment and testimonies raised legitimate questions about unjust enrichment and property contribution. Just before trial proceedings began, my brother's lawyer sent a last-minute proposal. It offered less than 40% of the current appraised value of the house in exchange for a signed waiver and no admission of fault. My lawyer relayed the offer to me. I rejected it. We replied that any future discussion would take place in court under formal supervision, with full documentation. That same evening, my brother tried calling my phone. Then he sent a message through an old email we hadn't used in years. It was brief, asking to talk just once outside of lawyers. I forwarded the message to my attorney. He filed a legal warning and submitted a request to bar further contact. The court approved the restriction. Any additional attempt from my brother would now count as a violation. As part of pre-trial discovery, more archived files were requested. While combing through an old phone, I found voicemails from my father sent during construction. One message captured him clearly complimenting me for building something lasting with your own hands. The audio was submitted and time-stamped. It fit perfectly into the timeline we'd already presented. During her deposition, my mother tried to revise the sequence of events. She minimized her involvement in encouraging the build and claimed she hadn't been aware of how much I had invested. The opposing counsel supported this narrative. We submitted photos taken by guests at family gatherings, shots of her standing beside me as I dug the garden, videos of her helping arrange stones for the driveway border. Her own texts, praising your beautiful home, were already in the record. The contradictions were documented and highlighted. Interest in the case began to grow locally. Without us reaching out, neighbors and acquaintances who had seen me working during construction began contacting my lawyer. A few offered to give statements under oath. One man submitted a signed statement detailing how he had lent me his ladder and saw me on weekends pouring concrete alone. Our roofing contractor also came forward with his original invoice, signed and dated, confirming that the full payment for materials and installation came directly from my account. No family member's name appeared anywhere on the document. The court then ordered an independent expert to assess how much value the construction had added to the land. The expert's report concluded that the structure had significantly increased the property's value, and that the current occupants, my brother and his wife, had directly benefited from the completed build despite contributing nothing. My father made one final attempt to delay the trial. His lawyer submitted a petition requesting private mediation. The judge declined. The matter, he said, was no longer a private family issue. It involved a legal dispute with documented damages and would proceed to trial as scheduled. The courtroom date was locked in. Everything was set. The courtroom was full on the first day of the trial. Some seats were taken by extended relatives, others by neighbors and acquaintances. I noticed familiar faces sitting apart, some clearly avoiding eye contact with each other. The divide in support was visible, even before the session began. My lawyer opened with a clear timeline, 5 years of work, every transaction, every stage of the house's construction. He presented printed photos mounted on boards, showing the evolution from bare soil to completed home. Screens displayed emails, permit confirmations, and copies of official documents. He broke down receipts by phase, foundation, framing, roofing, plumbing, and finishing. When my brother was called to testify, he admitted that our father had once said the house would go to whichever son settled down first. The courtroom paused at that. It directly contradicted their legal argument that the property had always been communal and flexible. His own statement supported the idea of the house being used as a reward for a specific milestone, not something open to all family members. Then my mother was shown a photo from 2 years ago. In it, she stood beside me on the finished porch, but now claimed she didn't know the build was permanent. The date stamp was clear. Her claim that my time there had always been temporary didn't hold. The image showed something completely different: recognition, pride, and a moment of closure. My lawyer submitted several more, each carefully dated and matched to event records. The judge asked for clarification on the financial contributions. My lawyer handed over bank statements showing every transfer came from my account. Permit paperwork listed me as the sole applicant. Invoices from hardware stores, plumbers, and suppliers matched the entries on my expense spreadsheets. When the judge pressed my parents about the timeline and how the house was given away, they admitted they had not expected any legal action. They thought, as the father put it, that I would understand eventually. The courtroom noted the phrasing. That admission made it clear the decision had been intentional, not a miscommunication or oversight. We submitted over 300 supporting documents, signed purchase orders, delivery slips, photos marked with progress dates, and even a few supplier loyalty point records, showing my years of repeated purchases. Every document reinforced the same point. The house was my build, not a family collaboration. A financial expert was brought in next. He reviewed the structure's estimated value and explained how my self-labor had saved tens of thousands in labor costs. His conclusion was that the house, as it stood, was an asset solely attributed to me, regardless of the land beneath it. He added that such contributions could be valued and compensated, even if the structure couldn't be separated from the property physically. During cross-examination, the family lawyer tried shifting the discussion toward emotional harm. He referenced the blog post, the attention the lawsuit had brought to family matters, and the discomfort it caused the younger couple. The judge shut it down. He said the trial was about financial and property disputes, not emotional discomfort from being held accountable. A close friend was called next. He testified about a phone call the day after the wedding. He described how I had shown up at his place with a small bag and no explanation, only to later reveal the house had been taken. He described how I had stopped speaking for hours, how I had asked him to keep quiet while I went through old receipts that night. His testimony didn't dramatize it. It just painted a real picture of what being blindsided looked like. Closing arguments followed. My lawyer summarized the core issue. The structure was not a shared space. It was built from the ground up by one person, without assistance, and had been taken without agreement, compensation, or acknowledgement. The other side reiterated their claim that I was repaid in family support and tradition, but offered no financial proof. The judge announced he would deliver a verdict in 2 weeks. A few days later, I found a note under my windshield at my apartment. No signature. Just a piece of paper with 2 lines. Drop it. It's over. I handed it over to the authorities and filed a report. Security footage was requested from the lot, and my lawyer advised staying alert. My workplace was already aware of the trial, and granted me paid leave to focus entirely on the final phase. I turned off my personal phone and removed myself from every group chat I hadn't already left. I didn't respond to messages, didn't attend any calls, and didn't answer any emails unless they came through my lawyer or HR. The waiting period was spent in silence. I stayed with close friends who understood the situation and respected the boundaries. No one asked for updates. No one brought up the past. I focused on what was next, not what I had lost, but what needed to be settled, once and for all. 2 weeks after the final hearing, the court issued its ruling. The land remained legally under my father's name, but the house was recognized as a separate and independently constructed asset, built, funded, and maintained entirely by me. The judge ruled that the structure held monetary value distinct from the land and must be treated accordingly under civil property law. My brother and his wife were given 2 options: either pay the full appraised value of the structure, based on the independent assessment submitted during trial, or vacate the property within 30 days. No extensions, no negotiation. A week before the deadline, they moved out. No public statements, no announcements. A neighbor let me know when the moving van came early one morning. The furniture I hadn't picked, the fixtures I hadn't installed, all packed up and taken elsewhere. The house stood quiet again, but it wasn't mine. Not yet. The following week, my parents sent a legal notice through their lawyer. They offered to formally transfer ownership of the land to me, but only if I signed a waiver relinquishing all future claims against the family, including any pending reputational damages, legal fees, and restitution. My lawyer reviewed the document. We declined. Instead, we filed a lien against the property. The lien covered the full court, acknowledged value of the house, plus legal costs. Until the amount was settled, my father could neither transfer nor sell the land without court clearance. It was effectively frozen. The court also granted me permission to remove or dismantle the structure as I saw fit. I could salvage materials, repurpose the design, or leave the house standing, but any choice would be legally binding and final. I didn't want to destroy it. I had built that house to be lived in. So I reached out to a nonprofit that specializes in relocating structures for families displaced by natural disasters. They worked mostly in rural areas, focusing on flood-hit villages and landslide zones. After reviewing the dimensions, layout, and materials, the organization agreed to take on the project. Over several weeks, a specialized crew came in. They carefully disassembled the home panel by panel, doors, windows, roofing sheets, support beams. I was present for the beginning and end of the process, but kept a distance during the middle stages. The team marked every section, packaged it for transport, and began reconstruction on a site more than 100 miles away. The new location was in a village that had been hit hard by seasonal flooding. The site had previously been a school, now abandoned, with families living in makeshift shelters nearby. The nonprofit worked with local officials to secure the new lot. My house, at least the physical pieces of it, was going to be rebuilt there. A few weeks later, I made the trip out. The foundation was different, slightly raised for better drainage. Some parts had been adjusted to fit the new space. It was smaller, missing a few internal finishes, and patched in areas, but it was unmistakably the house I had built. The garden didn't exist anymore, but the front porch railing was still mine. The windows still held the same trim I had painted with leftover stain. A local newspaper ran a piece about the relocation. They called it a home reclaimed for hope. The article didn't mention the legal battle, just that a structure donated by a private citizen had been saved and repurposed for displaced families. The final paragraph mentioned that the house would now serve as transitional housing for 3 families waiting on permanent reconstruction grants. Since then, no one from my family has reached out. Not directly, not through lawyers, not through social circles. The lien remains on the land. If they attempt to sell, lease, or transfer it without settling, the property becomes subject to court seizure. I updated my will last month. Everything I own now, and anything I may acquire later, has been directed away from family by default. There are safeguards in place. If anything ever happens to me unexpectedly, there will be no confusion about where it goes. I used part of the restitution and the remainder of my savings to buy a modest apartment in a new town. 2 bedrooms, paid in full. It's quiet. The windows face east, and the building has a shared garden that volunteers maintain on weekends. No one here knows the story. No one asks questions. There was no final conversation. No apology. No dramatic breakdown in court. Only a judgment, paperwork, and the sound of walls being taken apart one nail at a time. The house wasn't the real loss. I thought it was. I thought the point of the fight was about bricks and beams, but it wasn't. What I actually lost was something much smaller and much heavier. The illusion that I was ever truly wanted, not just tolerated until someone else became more convenient to reward.